Welcome back to SDPtalk. Now we have a very special guest today, the legendary personification of common sense, Mike Graham.
Very good morning to you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, I think, by my reckoning, you've interviewed me about 100 times.
Probably.
But today it's me asking the questions.
Do you remember when I started interviewing you though? Because I'm not sure I can, because I've got a sort of slight fog about the whole of COVID and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think it might have been before that.
It was during during what Australians call the Pando.
Was it?
Yeah, we should call it that now.
The Pando, I like that, yeah.
Yeah, it was during that because it was by phone. And the first one we ever did was just a telephone sort of interview. Yeah, I think it was 2000, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Sorry, 2020. Yeah.
2020, the same year that Keir Starmer had the voice coach lessons.
All right. As I said yesterday, he needs to get his money back. He's paid for that. He's been ripped off.
Only he could come up with, the person that he sort of smuggled into whatever it was in the Labour Party office was a voice coach. I mean, it could have been anything. Turns out it was a voice coach. I mean, come on.
It just hasn't worked.
No,
it's a big turn off. Shocking.
Yeah.
Anyway, so listen, I can ask you anything, but I want to do a bit of bio first. So you're, if I've got it right, you were English by birth but Scottish by blood, right?
My parents,
like me.
Yeah, my parents both from Scotland.
Yeah.
My father was a Protestant. Grew up in a place called Cathcart in Glasgow, south side. Right. My mother was from Renfrew, which was sort of slightly outside. And
was she Church of Scotland as well?
No, she was a Catholic, which was partly how I came to be born in England, because they got married. Yeah. And of course in Scotland at that time, and even now in some places, getting married to a Catholic, if you're a Protestant, is quite a big deal.
It's worked out for me.
Yeah, but it worked out for them too, and for me. But I never really knew any of that. So I was born in London, where they moved to, thankfully. Yeah. I mean, in Scotland I loved, but I was born in North London in Hampstead, and lived in Hampstead, grew up in Hampstead. And they weren't wealthy, because in those days you could still live in places like that. It was quite sort of bohemian and cool.
They had working class population.
There was a musician that lived across the street. There was an actor down the road, but it wasn't like it is now, which is sort of footballers and lawyers. So born, and then my mother wanted me to be raised as a Catholic, because that's kind of what Catholics do. So
that's how the religion gets bigger.
Yeah, so I went to Catholic primary school, where she was a teacher. Went to ended up in Malyn. Went to Catholic grammar school called Cardinal Vaughan in Kensington, and my sister went to the Sacred Heart in Hammersmith. So we had sort of quite a Catholic upbringing. My father, of course, mocked it continually, and I was
it strict at those Catholic schools?
It was quite strict at the secondary school, not so much in the primary. Didn't really notice it, but yeah, we had a discipline master in the grammar school, and it was thought to be. I mean, it still is now. I think it's an independent now. Yeah, still a pretty good school.
I have a mate that went to a Catholic school in Gloucestershire, and they had a teacher who, and it still sounds unbelievable, apparently got a grade A in maths for every single student.
Right.
But it was a bit sort of, I won't whack you, boy. I'll beat the living daylights out of you.
I mean, it was. We had, I think, Dominican brothers.
Yes.
Who were quite cruel. Harsh. And I had nuns actually in the first. Actually, now that you mention it, there was a nun. There was one woman whose name was emblazoned in my memory, Sister Isabel, who used to hit you across the fingers with a ruler.
Yeah.
Well, my wife was about 8.
She had that actually. My wife's father worked for the Catholic Education Service in New South Wales. Yeah, and she was educated by nuns. Quite strict.
I mean, she didn't like it, but she did learn. It didn't do me any great deal of harm, I don't think. Yeah, Yeah. I don't have any strange, fetishes about nuns or anything. No. I know you're not going to ask me about that, but
so it was going to feature that.
And then. And my mother was a teacher. My dad worked in newspapers, which is sort of how I got into that.
Okay, so that's the link.
Because he was an artist, actually. He'd been to Glasgow School of Art. Right. And he was incredibly skilled, because in those days he would train to be something. He was like trained lithographer. Yeah. So he had, he could make.
So did he do original images for the paper?
No, he basically was a graphic artist. So what he used to do was he retouched things, but he drew maps by hand, and he was a calligrapher. Right. So he could actually write.
Which paper did he?
He worked for the Daily Sketch first of all years ago, and then the Evening News, because he didn't want to work at night. Basically, he was one of those good parents, unlike me. When I worked in Fleet Street, I worked at night. And he was a master of all manner of things, and he was really well read, and he sort of caught the back end of the Second World War. Yeah. He was incredibly argumentative, which is kind of where I think I got it from. And we used to sit around the kitchen table.
I can't see that, Mike.
I know. And it was like, if you haven't got anything to say, you better leave. Yeah. It wasn't like just sit there in silence. You had to contribute. You just had to talk.
It does go. I think trades do go in families. My father was in built environment, landscape architecture, and I was trained as a planner and surveyor. Right. But you tend to sort of
because it's what you know, and I used to go into his office with him in the old Fleet Street, which was Carmelite House, the Associated Newspapers place, and sort of marvel at it really,
Yeah.
because it was very much more organic in those days. You
Yeah.
could smell the ink as the
Yeah,
papers
yeah.
were printed in the building.
Boot polish. It smells
Yeah,
like,
you could smell like boot polish. You could see the big rolls of paper being lifted up into the top of the printing plant. You could see there was a terrible noise of typewriters because there wasn't anything else in those days. And it just was a sort of viscerally enjoyable place to be for me, you know.
Well, I want to talk about because it's a different world now, isn't it? And when you walk down Fleet Street, you know, you see the old buildings.
I find it quite sad.
It is sad. It's gone and the hubbub's gone. But before I do, just to finish off on the Scottish thing, so the key thing, because I always say I'm Scottish, you know, Scottish by both parents.
Yeah.
You know, mum's entirely Scots, dad's partly. But you know, I support England in the footy and so on. So key question. So if it's England or Scotland in rugby, what is it?
Scotland.
There you go. So you're Scots?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I call myself Scottish and British.
Yeah.
I also spent, confusingly, quite a bit of time in Wales. And so when it comes to Welsh rugby, quite often I'll support, because they're so into the rugby. And I've never played rugby in England. And rugby for me in England has always been a bit of an upper crust sort of pursuit.
Yeah,
whereas in Wales, it was very much sort of working class thing.
Yeah. And they're struggling in Wales, aren't they, recently, the team? And more people are playing football, aren't they? So it's a big issue.
Yeah. I mean, they've got sort of, I don't feel quite, you know, when, for example, you know, in our building Talk Sport are there and they get very excited when the World Cup's on and the Euros and everything like that. And I've never felt that kind of, let's get behind England. I mean, I'll do it, but I don't, I don't feel it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think you can be, it's like a lot of assimilation it's easier for us, you know. I mean, I sort of look at sound English and I have no, I always support the English football team, certainly.
Even against Scotland?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, it's easy not
to
support Scotland.
And Orcadians are different anyway.
That's true.
We're sort of, you know, that's
you'd be like the Scousers,
it's a bit different, you know. We go to Scotland if we travel south. So look, Fleet Street, so paint us a picture. You got this, you started, who were your mentors? Who did you sort of look up? Because one of the, you know, we've just debated it at length with the Pando and lockdowns. One of the losses was just people coming together and learning, like particularly young people can't learn if they're not, you know, they're all, the young people were stuck in their bedrooms having a little box room in Acton, can't go anywhere, you're not going to learn anything. So who were your mentors?
No, exactly right.
Who did you sort of...
Well, I was lucky in a way because my dad, because of his association with various, you know, newspapers and things, he also was a mad golfer. Used to play a lot of golf, and there was a thing called the European Press Golf Society, which because I started playing golf at quite a young age. He was very good, being Scottish, and he had a brother who was a professional. And we used to go to places like La Manga in Spain, and we used to play these matches against the Germans.
You still play?
Yeah, not as much, just because I don't get around to it. But I played a lot until about 2 or 3 years ago. You know. And so I would meet all these other journalists. A lot of them were sports journalists, actually, who many of them were like football reporters or people like that. And they would have these, they always had great fun, it seemed to me. And they would talk about, you know, I was off in Madrid doing this, or I was down in, you know, covered the Paris, or I went to the World Cup in Brazil, you know. And it all just seemed very glamorous. And I thought, that sounds like pretty good. And somebody else is paying it. You kind of go, I can't quite believe this.
You'd have watched those games anyway.
Yeah, right? And I'm thinking, well, this sounds great. You know, I didn't ever want to be a sports journalist, but just the general idea of having expenses and being able to travel, you know, which really appealed to me.
Good,
And so all of those guys were kind of mentors in a way, even though they weren't specifically mentors. And then when I got my first job in sort of proper publishing, because I'd gone to university in Bath and had kind of decided.
And how long did you drop? You left there?
I did 2 years basically. I did one first year, and then
what were you reading?
I was reading economics and politics, and there was a really good lecturer there called Roger Eatwell, I think it was, who had written a couple of really good books about British politics, which was why I went there in the first place, and I got to know him quite well. But I also got stuck into the student newspaper.
Right, okay.
And in those days, if you didn't have a sabbatical, I mean, I basically spent all my time on the student newspaper, so the first year I kind of failed, and they were like...
But it didn't count the first year?
Not really, but they said, if you want to stay, you're going to have to do your first year again. So I went, okay. So I did the first year again, did pretty much the same thing, and I was just like, I'm finding the newspaper thing is more fun to me than anything. And I turned what they did, which was like a newsletter type thing, into a tabloid, and I was always attacking the student union. It was fun. So when I finally got a job in a magazine, I then started to kind of think, well, I should really try and make inroads into Fleet Street, because you know, this is only a stepping stone. And so one of my friends, one of my dad's friends, who was a sports reporter, had become, I think, I think he'd become deputy sports editor or something of the Mail on Sunday.
Yeah.
So he put a word in for me at the Mail on Sunday, and I got some subbing shifts, which were great because I'd go in.
What cover games or particularly?
No, this was news.
News.
Not in
right.
Because I never wanted to do sport.
Yeah.
You know, so it was news. And you'd go in, and I'd go in on like a Friday night, and the shift was 4 hours, and you get paid in those days. This would have been about 1981, 82, around then, 45 quid for a 4-hour shift.
Those days, that's a lot of money.
Quite a lot of money, and you'd do about 3 hours, and the chief sub would come over and say, "I haven't got anything for you. You can probably go if you want."
So is it one of the things that we harp on about a bit in the SDP is over credentialisation of everything? Yeah, you've got to have this ticket, you've got to have this degree before you can go in.
Yeah.
See, in our world, I think, say in government, there's too many people with rubbishy PPE degrees, and too few people that used to literally sweep roads and go through it up the ranks. And I reckon you should be able to go in at 16 and get right to the top of any organisation.
And that's what newspapers used to be like. There was no professional qualification as such. Some people would sign up to the NCTJ scheme, which was the national training scheme, but you didn't need anything other than O levels to get into it. You know, so you could go literally at 16, and by 18 you'd be covering local court cases. But that's the other thing, is now people don't cover local news anymore. You know, and local newspapers don't really exist. There's a few local websites. Well,
that's a sad thing. I mean, the city that we're talking from, in London, you know, a few years ago, as a kid, particularly as a northerner, you used to come down to King's Cross and you arrive and you get out, and it's the Evening Standard. The guy selling the Evening Standard there, isn't it? He's calling it, and it's out there.
Right.
And then you've seen the decline of that newspaper from being something that people would actually pay for to something you couldn't give away. That got thinner and thinner, and it's like a metaphor.
And now it's stopped altogether.
Yes, finished,
It's absolutely ridiculous. And they put Dylan Jones in charge of it in the final kind of death knell, who declared, you know, news doesn't sell newspapers anymore, so we're not going to do news off the front. And you go, what are you doing?
It's gone.
What's the point? You know.
Yeah, it's like catching a falling knife, isn't it? Anyone who's invested in it. But it is sad in the local community. Your local paper, the physicality of it, newsprint, people used to read it, and we're the same in Northumberland. Sort of just
it's just died. But I mean, in terms of mentors and things, there would be people then. I remember there was a guy called Stuart Stephen, who was the editor of the Mail on Sunday. Who I didn't really know, but you kind of, as a kind of keen journalism student, you'd kind of hear about these people. And the thing about Fletcher, suddenly I was in the same room as him, and he was coming out and talking to people. And I don't think he ever came out and said anything to me. But as long as you could do the job,
you're not like to be in awe of. You wouldn't have got staff.
Not particularly in awe of him, no. But I was kind of in awe of the fact that I was there. Once when I started getting some shifts on the Sun. And that was when Kelvin Mackenzie was the editor. Who was a hell of a character. And once I remember sitting in the Sun newsroom, and it used to have this huge, and again the building used to shake when you put the presses on. You know, and I remember the huge sort of wooden double doors, and above them was a big sign that said, "You're entering Sun Country," and it felt like the best place in the world, you know, because it really was. It did 4 million a day.
Has its own culture as well, in the place.
Had its own culture, and it was one of those papers that even the city boys bought it. They bought the FT and the Sun for a laugh. You know, they still had, you know, page 3 girls. And one day Rupert Murdoch walked through the double doors, and I was just like, "Oh my God, it's Rupert Murdoch."
I have a friend who's a literary editor for the New Yorker now, James Wood, who he was literary editor of The Guardian in the 80s. And he once went down, I think might have been Canary Wharf or somewhere, he went to an event which was meant to be a Guardian or a literary event, and he went into the wrong room, and he was looking around and he said, "This doesn't really feel like it." He says, "Am I in the right place? What is it?" "Oh no, they're with the Sun." Completely different. Sorry, mate. Down there, corridor, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a fabulous place to work because it was full of people just bursting with energy. And that was where I first met Nick Ferrari, funnily enough. And he was, at that time, the sort of chief showbiz guy, running Bizarre, which was their showbiz column. And I remember sitting there, and it was about my 3rd shift, I think, and I was very young and green, 23, 22, something like that. And this guy walked in the double doors, who I didn't know, wearing a very crumpled but quite expensive looking suit, a crocodile skin attaché case, and he had a black eye, and he came and sat next to me, and he went, "Hello, I'm Nick Ferrari." And I went, "Oh hi, I'm Mike Graham." I said, "What happened to you?" He said, "Oh, I've just been to Australia, where I was asked to doorstep Elton John, to ask him if he was, to doorstep John Reed, who was his manager, to ask him if he was having an affair with Elton John." Right. And he got punched for his pleasure. Turns out the story was true. And they were having an affair, but in those days Elton was still straight.
So
nobody,
right.
you know,
so you couldn't.
Couldn't do it. And of course, nowadays nobody would care.
No, it's changed a bit.
Even when George Michael kind of got caught out in the toilets, even then they made a joke of it because it wasn't a horrific thing anymore to suddenly be outed as being gay. He didn't care. You know?
Well, black eyes. Yeah, one of my boys plays rugby in Australia. He lives in Australia, and turned up to work with a black eye, having played the usual Tongans and Fijians on the weekend. And he's a little bit worried about it, and I said, how'd it go? He said, no, they're fine, it's a sporting injury. Fine.
They love their rugby.
No worries,
exactly right.
So I want to talk about New York City. So when, the chronology, when did, because you were editor of the Scottish Mirror, weren't you?
That was later.
That was later.
Yeah.
So New York first. So you went to New York in the early 80s, didn't you?
Early 80s. So once I started getting some bits of work out Fleet Street, I was at the same time talking to my ex-girlfriend who I'd broken up with, who I'd met at university, who was American. She had done like a junior year abroad and had come to live and finished her degree and then come back to live in London with me for a while. But then she couldn't get a visa you couldn't get, funnily enough, see how easy it is now. The usual thing.
Well, we got married. I'm, married to a foreign national. The timing of my marriage was determined by the fact that she was going to get kicked out. I've always, been quite open about
that was our situation.
Best thing that ever happened.
And we were only 21, you see, and I was like, I don't really want to get married, it's too young, blah, blah, blah. So she went back to America, and we broke up, and, did other things. And then, I guess this would have been a couple of years later, and we decided to give it another go. And she was like, well, you'll have to come here. So I thought, okay. So by then, there was a guy called Ian Walker, who also worked at the Mail on Sunday, another golfing sort of connection. And I was playing golf with him one day, and I said, I'm thinking of going to America. What do you think? And he'd been New York correspondent for The Sun.
Right. So he gave you a few contacts? Yeah.
So he said, well, there's a magazine called The Star. He said they've moved out of New York City, but it's a pretty good operation. Quite a lot of Australians work there. Quite a lot of Brits work there. Because every Murdoch publication, there's Brits and Australians everywhere, wherever it is in the world. But I didn't know that it was a Murdoch publication. So he gave me a couple of names. So I guess, my kids always ask me, how did you get in touch with all these people? I'm not actually sure. I presume I must have rung them at some point. Because, days before mobile phones, no email.
You can't, you to go back to that thing, and what was it's like hanging like a thread. You arrive in a foreign city, what have you got? You've got a little number. You got are you in? is the person in there? They're out.
Right. It's a different world. Like sliding doors, isn't it? So if so-and-so hadn't answered the phone. So there was a guy called Mike Miller, who was an English reporter, whose name I'd been given. So I rang him. And he was like, oh, you're coming up. And he said, talk to so they gave me some numbers. And I eventually got them to give me a couple of shifts, basically, on this thing called The Star. But it was in a place called Tarrytown, which is just north of Manhattan, on the Hudson River. And I sort of really didn't know what I was doing. And
is that towards Beacon, on that line?
Yeah, it's on the way to Albany, I guess. But it's not as far. It's sort of like going to St Albans, sort of half an hour out of town. Westchester County, more or less. You know where the Tappan Zee Bridge is? It's there.
It's White Plains, isn't it?
Around there. And so I met these guys at Grand Central Station one morning, and I'd been to be reconnected with my ex-girlfriend. She lived in Queens, which I thought was horrific, because I was like, well, hang on a minute. If I'm going to come to New York, I don't want to live in Queens.
Donald Trump's from Queens.
Yeah, well, his father is as well. Funnily enough, I was it was Koreatown as well, which is where we wwere, which is great, by the way. But yeah, so I met these guys under the clock, as you do in Grand Central. We got on this train, we went to Tarrytown, and walked in, and it was sort of a normal-looking newsroom. And it wasn't until I started reading through the actual magazine, which was a newspaper format, that when it said proprietor K.R. Murdoch, that I realised this is part of the Murdoch organisation. I thought, wow,
that's good.
And it was very much a sort of celebrity, and it was a bit like sort of an old copy of what you would call the Sunday People.
And did you do a good shift there?
I did. Well, I did. The funny thing was, I think they gave me 2 shifts, and the second shift was the day they were going to press. And so on the second day, there wasn't much work to do. So we went down to the pub. There was a local pub called the Mustard Seed, I remember. And there was sub-editors down there.
But did you stay a long time? That was a job?
No, this was just a little jaunt to see if I could do it.
See if you could do it.
See if I could do it. And I'd already, by day 2, I'd said, do you think you could give me any work? And they said, well, we can guarantee you 5 shifts. basically for a week, which was good enough for me to come to sort of move to America. You know? But I went down to the pub, and one by one people were getting a phone call to come back because it was like, you know, they've been there quite a long time. And eventually I got a phone call to go back, and I was like, I've only worked here for 2 days. They're already bollocking me, you know. So then I came back about a month later. Literally with nothing. I think I had $100 in my pocket. I mean, it sounds apocryphal, but it's true.
It happens,
And moved in with my girlfriend in Queens. Used to take the number 7 line from Flushing into Manhattan, into Grand Central every day.
Did you? So you actually lived in Queens in the end? That was
lived in Queens for a bit, but I said, I'm not doing this for long. So I got an apartment eventually in Manhattan after about 2 months.
You never lived in
looked back.
You never lived in Brooklyn?
No, see, Brooklyn in those days wasn't trendy.
No.
I mean, it was only trendy if you were really wealthy and you could live on Park Slope. But there was nothing like there is now. And Brooklyn was kind of a no-go area, basically. So I was like, I need to be in Manhattan. So my first apartment I rented on 26th Street, between Lexington and 3rd, which had sort of hookers on the corner, a great diner, and I became quite friendly with them. I'd be like, hey Mike, how are you? It was like a movie. And I couldn't quite believe I was living in New York.
Is like a movie though, isn't it? Because we've seen so much, right from films from the 30s, 40s, 50s onwards, you've seen so much of it. And so when tourists go, it's like
and I still get a bit of a thrill even now when I get on in a cab and coming from JFK and you see the first time you see the skyline and the Empire State Building. There is something about it that's kind of, you know, quite emotional for me. Yeah, it is. It's like I call it my second home.
It will, you know, it does become. I mean, I only lived in London 5 or 6 years, but it's. If you have lived in this city for a while, it is your home. Really, and
I mean, London is definitely my home. But New York, my daughter was born there as well, back in the 90s, and I got married there.
Future president.
She could be. Yeah. I mean, you know. She would probably disagree, but you never know. She's now the one that lives in Dubai. Right. So I spent 10 years basically in New York, and I mean everywhere I went in America, I couldn't quite believe it. When I remember I first went to Los Angeles, and I'm driving a rented car. You know, I came from Thatcher's Britain, which had only just really started. We weren't very rich. I didn't have a car. I couldn't drive if I left Britain. You know, my parents lived in a flat in London. I'd never really seen anything like it. You know, and I was driving down, and suddenly there's the Beverly Hills Hotel, and I'm thinking, I was going there for a drink. And I remember walking into the bar in Beverly Hills Hotel, and Sean Penn was there, and I thought, this is bonkers. This is insane, Crazy. And then went to Dallas, and there's the Dallas thing, and I just kept singing the theme tune from Dallas as I'm driving, and it was stuff like that you I couldn't quite believe how lucky I was.
I always say, my advice to young people always is, and it's really simple advice, it's really, really simple. If you're enjoying what you're doing, continue. If you don't, stop and do something else. And that is basically it. It isn't always true. Sometimes you've got to get through things that aren't too good to get better things later.
And sometimes bad things happen, and you have to kind of, I tell my kids now, it's not about how well you're doing, it's how you deal with it when it all goes wrong. Because it will.
It will. But if it's working, because some people, when it's working, they stop it and then make it not work. It's really weird.
Well, one of the problems in newspapers, actually, and I suspect this is true of a lot of businesses, they'd get a great reporter and suddenly they'd promote them and go, well, you should go to the news desk now. And you go, why? Well, so you can manage other people who are not as good as you.
Working.
But you were a good reporter, but you might be a really, really bad manager. And they would continually do things like that. Or they would take somebody who's a really good features editor and make them editor, and it often didn't work.
And it fails. What about sport in New York? Did you attach yourself to?
I did. I was a Mets fan.
Good lad.
Yeah, definitely. Good. I never liked the Yankees.
That's our family. I
don't know why actually. There was just something about the Yankees, and there was something about the Mets that I just thought was cool.
I'm going to clip this to my eldest son, who's a mad Mets fan.
I'll tell you something even funnier than that. Was because I didn't know how to drive when I first came to America. My then girlfriend had a car. A little Dodge Colt. So she actually taught me how to drive in the parking lot of Shea Stadium.
Wow.
Which was the old Shea Stadium, which is not there anymore.
Not anymore.
Right?
No.
And I went to a few Mets games and was lucky enough to know, I had a friend by that time who was a cousin of somebody that was also studying at Bath, but who lived in Boston. And he
was Darryl Strawberry.
Darryl Strawberry was the Mets.
Around that time.
And well, I was there when they won the World Series as well against the Red Sox. When Billy Bonds, I think it was, the ball went through his legs, and that was and it was hilarious. And things I was at a Billy Joel concert, and the same week of the World Series, and in between songs he was like reading out the score, you know, because he's from Long Island, so he was a Mets fan. But this friend of mine worked for ABC Radio, I think it was, in Boston, and he said, you've got to come to Fenway Park. You have to come, and you have to pronounce it Fenway Park. You know? And that was a real experience as well, because it was the oldest baseball stadium in America. And he taught me everything about the game.
I love those trad stadiums that actually, when you see them, it's
the green wall.
But it's funny, the attendance isn't particularly big, and they look massive, don't they? But then it can be like 28,000.
Yeah, but it was a three-corner stadium, and you could see the town on the other side of the green wall. But sometimes the ball would go over the green wall. But I learned all about, you know, the seventh inning stretch and how many relief pitches you can have. So much so that when I was playing Trivial Pursuit with some Americans, and they thought I was a smart ass because I was winning, they went to the final question, was a sports question, as they'll never know this. And it was something like, you know, how many relief pitches, or how many practice pitches is a relief pitcher allowed before he has to start pitching? And I just went 5, or whatever the number was. And they went, how'd you know that? And I went, well, this guy Steve Novelli taught me everything there is to know about baseball. So I love baseball. I didn't get into the football quite so much.
It is a great game. I know. I like baseball. I'm a cricket fan, and I think that you have to. I think baseball generates tension quicker, obviously, because 3 strikes in the air, so there's more on it. But obviously the lack of variety in the pitch. You know, the pitches are 3 pitches basically, aren't they? So that's it. What about the ice hockey? Did you take
ice hockey? Not really. No. I mean, it was. I knew it was a thing. But it was a sort of a different vibe somehow. You know. I never quite got into that, and I did get into the football later on, just because I started writing some sports stuff for a magazine. So I did a few sort of football games, if you like. But it all took a bit too long for me. I mean, baseball was nice because it was in the summer, and you didn't mind sitting for 3 or 4 hours drinking beer and eating hot dogs.
In the bleachers.
Yeah, exactly. But you know. The ice hockey didn't quite really appeal to me.
It's a fast game. It's a great game, ice hockey.
I used to watch it on TV, because one of the great things about I spent a lot of time in bars. It might not surprise you to know. And so a lot of time you'd be in a bar and you'd be watching it, because it was always on. I mean, the thing about sport in America is it's never off the TV. There's always a game, you know, unlike here where there isn't always a game. And so I probably spent quite a lot of time watching I think the New York Rangers, I think it was.
Rangers play at Madison Square Garden now. Very expensive to get a ticket there. I was there in March, and it's ferociously expensive.
But everything's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous,
now. I mean, all ticketing now for anything seems to me to be bonkers.
It's it's punitive, and I mean, I think it's a separate thing, isn't it, with terracing and the tragedies that's happened. But the days when you could just. I used to live just north of Finsbury Park. I was a QPR fan, but you know, if I fancied going to say George Graham's Arsenal, pretty good to watch. Just decide at about lunchtime in the pub. Do you want to go and watch it? Just go down, sit
in the old library,
North Bank, and just go and pay.
I went there as a kid. I mean, used to love it.
You know, it's good. Not as good as QPR, but you know, it's good.
Well, QPR, funny enough, was my local school team, because Colonel Vaughan was sort of Holland Park, Shepherd's Bush. So a lot of my mates were QPR fans.
Yeah, it's not. I mean,
around there.
People do. You've got to be honest about it. People do, because of the 70s and Stan Bowles and missing out on the championship and not on the last game. People our age particularly think the club's bigger than it is. And it isn't a particularly big club. I mean, 14,000, 17,000 usually, and you know, and then we went up. And
there was that there was that flirtation briefly, wasn't there, with the rich guy who was going to build a new stadium. I think that all go away.
No, stay at Loftus Road in my view. I mean, you know, there's no point in building. I'm against people building stadiums at half full. If we score first at Loftus Road, it's great.
But apparently, one of Labour's great big new ideas is to rebuild Old Trafford. I don't understand why they're doing that.
All of the things they're saying will take a long time to do and won't make any difference to now. What they can do is damage it now. Before we go on, so you were in the States at a historically important time politically, because it was a Cold War. And we had, you could argue, the last time the Americans had perhaps they're going to get another great president, but Reagan. Massive.
Reagan was amazing. I funnily enough, wrote a piece in the Telegraph just a couple of weeks ago, saying that Trump's inauguration actually reminded me of that whole period, because I'd come from Britain, which would pretty much been on its backside in the 70s, you know, with the Labour, you know, crisis brigade, and you know, power cuts and rubbish in the streets and all of that. And then suddenly Thatcher came in 79. I was only 19. My abiding memory is I wanted to go to the Falklands War and fight for saving the place from the Algies. I mean, I don't know why really, but it was kind of, that was how you felt. You felt like you were doing something for the country. But it hadn't quite fed through to the economy yet. So when I left in '83, people were still not particularly well off, you know. And I went to America, and suddenly here's this guy talking about, you know, we are the whited sepulchre on the hill. It's morning in America. But you can do anything you want, and it felt like that.
Yeah, but that's also the quality. I mean, we talked about it on your show. The quality of a politician. People want, particularly if you have kids, you want someone to look up to the president. You want some. I think Reagan could. You know, a lot of the great presidents you could. And recently, it's been more difficult to do that.
Well, he was dismissed by a lot of people on the left, because he was an actor.
Phenomenal communicator.
A brilliant communicator. Yeah. He was probably the beginning. I mean, I suppose JFK, you would say, was also brilliant, but obviously.
But Reagan was a better.
Reagan was tremendous.
Reagan was a better speaker, actually. If you look at so everyone talks about Kennedy's, presidential address, inauguration, but which is fantastic. But if you look at there's a speech, I think it's mid '60s, where Reagan's giving a speech on behalf of someone. One of the best speeches there. It's in black and white, and he just delivers it and nails it. This is when he was an ex-Democrat and actor.
Yes.
And you won't. I always say to people, you want to learn how to give a good speech. I don't think you can. I've never been particularly brilliant at political speeches, but because you've got to have it. I think it's a sort of personal thing. You're either particularly good. You can make yourself less worse.
You can make yourself less bad, but the answer clearly is not to get a voice coach, because that won't help you.
And not pay for it, yeah.
But that's the thing, you know, how can people, I'm sorry to keep going back to Keir Starmer, but people keep saying, you know, well, he's either a decent barrister or he's not. I don't think I know plenty of barristers, as I'm sure you do. Most of them.
I've hired barristers far brighter than
most of them are pretty entertaining people. They've got stories, they've got charisma, because they need to.
No, but he's not sharp. He's not sharp. I worked for 17 years as a developer, building supermarkets, some housing and other stuff, roadside stuff, and occasionally local authorities would refuse our scheme. And we'd have to go to appeal. It happened quite a lot. And so you ended up in a public inquiry, and I always paid for the very, very best planning barrister I could get. And some of them, infinitely, I mean, they're so sharp and so bright and so articulate and so clever. No, I mean, as barristers go, in my
you wouldn't hire him.
He's not a good barrister.
No, you would not hire him.
No. I'm sorry, Keir. Anyway, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Couple of things I want to do before we finish. The revolution in media. I mean, it's sort of happening before our eyes. So
it is.
And a lot. So the trust, the decline, the collapse in trust in what people call mainstream media or broadcast media is just palpable, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
People, particularly last 10 years.
Yeah.
5,
I mean, I think it's been particularly prevalent since Brexit, to be honest, because an awful lot of people saw what was happening back in sort of 2016.
Yeah.
And it was shocking, actually. I mean, I, as a journalist, have been really taken aback by how bad journalism has got, and I mean, in every aspect of it, including, newspaper journalism is still where I came from. It's still my kind of, I suppose, my spiritual home. But I love broadcasting. Probably I enjoy doing this job now more than any other job I've ever done. But there's nobody doing much digging, it seems to me, anymore. There's nobody sort of, political journalism, I think, particularly. There's, with one or two exceptions, a lot of it is just, Keir Starmer said that, and here's what somebody else said. And there's not a lot of exposés of things going on. There's not a lot of tenacious kind of what I would call awkward, difficult journalists.
I think that's
because we're supposed to be awkward and difficult,
Yeah, and on some of the really sort of difficult topics like the grooming gangs. You have one Times, is Andrew Norfolk?
Andrew Norfolk, who did a brilliant job.
Did a brilliant job, yeah.
But that's kind of a rarity.
But it's a rarity, and also as an issue, it didn't. I think you're right about Brexit. I think that was a real moment where the mainstream majority voted something, and it would have been a much bigger vote in favour of without Project Fear.
Totally.
So the mainstream majority wanted it, so that was the moderate position in it, the mainstream position anyway.
Right.
And then the whole of the elite just turned on us and said it's not going to be, and it was a flip. And then, but maybe just people have been noticing it more. But the real breaches, the things that drive me mad, are so if because there's not always anything else to listen to in the morning. So you switch on you're in bed, you're just sort of waking up, and you switch on BBC Radio 4 today.
Right. Which has gone so far down the path.
It's so poor, but the listening figures have collapsed as well. But I'll give you 2 examples of the sort of thing. You tell me what you think as a journalist of this. So I'm at home, and they'll have what they call a decent big segment, 12 minutes, on say knife crime in London.
And that's a long time, isn't it? That's a long time.
But they do occasionally have these, and they interview 2 or 3 people. So they'll do one on knife crime, and they'll talk about how bad it is, and they'll talk about the tragedies, which it is a tragedy. And then they'll interview some guests, and the guests will say, well, I think we need more youth clubs. It's really the youth clubs that, it's really going to do. And I can listen to 12 minutes of that, and not once would they mention the truth of, say, the crisis in the black family and the lack of fathers in the home as mentors for these kids. Fatherhood never mentioned at all. Nothing to see here.
Right.
And
because it's an extension of what is the kind of considered, what I would call the considered kind of middle class view of the world. Yeah. Which is that, we don't really know much about this, but we'll talk to a couple of people who do know a lot about it, but they'll be intrinsically biased because they won't want to cause offence to any community at all. So we'll just go along with it. This is what I mean. They've forgotten how to be difficult. Like I say, I got into journalism because I wanted to be awkward. I didn't want to sit in a box of celebrities watching a football match. I didn't want to be invited to parties with MPs. I don't care. I don't want to hang out with those people. I want to put them on the spot. But these journalists now, I think, are so embedded in the system that they can't see where the story is.
But it's it's filtering. It's a breach of common sense anyway. If they really want to talk about serious causes, the collapse in the family is a cause of it makes things worse in educational terms, mental health. But it just ramps up. Delinquency.
But if you were to get into that conversation about, for example, motherhood, how we've got. The one at the moment nobody wants to talk about is the falling birth rate, right? Because they're worried because what you might do if you're a misogynistic male is start saying, well, women should get back in the kitchen. Which of course is a rather crude way of saying it. But the point is that if women are no longer having children or not having them until a much later age, then there's a problem.
There won't be a society if we don't. No. If the TFR is lower than 2, actually just collapses, and it's very low now. Yeah, no, it's quite right. What a politician like me might say is that you might want some houses for young kids to get into, start a family. It may be a factor. But I'll give you another example. Housing is a great example. This is exactly the sort of thing I'm talking about in journalism, where particularly the culprits, these people I'm talking about, the same programme can have a 15-minute slot on housing. I'm not joking, I'm making this up. I can listen to that 15 minutes. And they'll talk about planning, or they'll talk about house building or private sector and the government schemes. And not once will they mention mass immigration as a cause of the present housing crisis.
Which is mad, isn't it?
And it's, I say, it's an omerta. But that's where he's saying, this is getting weird now.
Well, this is it. I say to people all the time, do you not think that the reason why the NHS is struggling right now more than ever is because there's a lot more people using it? And you can hear the sort of the sharp intake of breath because they think the next thing you're going to say is because there's a lot of immigrants, as opposed to the fact that then they'll do that kind of reverse ferret thing where they'll go, but if it wasn't for the immigrants, we wouldn't have an NHS. And that's the only context.
You would have trained.
But that's the only context they want to talk about immigration in. I know. But maybe that's changing, because at least now, if the Tories and even Labour have at least recognised that we've got too many people here, maybe they'll have to start thinking about why we've got too many people here and what we do about that.
I think you see the regret. I'm not sure how it'll. I've met Kemi Badenoch a couple of times. She's personable and I think she's actually quite a good communicator person.
I think she is. I did an interview with her and I was quite impressed. But she's not doing a great job.
She can't. But it's a hospital pass, because anything she says, Mike, like she's saying something on immigration or on welfare benefits today, of all days. And people say, well, you didn't do that when you were in power. You've just had 12 years and you made everything worse. No, I was talking about the journalism. I don't know how a journalist at the BBC can look themselves in the mirror if they do a 15-minute piece about housing and not mention the demand side. And if you do literally just on the numbers, because I'm a simple person, I've just reduced it to the numbers, 1.4 million, 750,000 net implies a housing need, if you divide it by 2.4, of about 250,000 houses. That's it. We don't even build them.
I think also people are now living in places where they see what's going on around them, and when they watch what the journalists are saying, there's no comparison with the two things. And they're going, well, hang on, you all live in London, you all have a view, right? And you think it's not the right thing to say that neighbourhoods have been completely changed. You may not even know they have been, because maybe you don't even go there, but you can go and find places in London that have been completely changed. You go to Whitechapel,
Nothing,
where they've got the underground signs in Urdu.
Nothing to see here.
And they don't want to talk about that. I mean, I kept saying about Tower Hamlets this week. The Chinese wanted to put their embassy there. I said, have they been to Tower Hamlets? I mean, why would you? I've been there. I go there quite a lot because it's on the opposite side of the river from where I live. And quite frankly, you wouldn't know you were in Britain.
Well, they've got sectarian local political control now because the Arise Party, they've got a new party.
Right.
And logically, a lot of the brighter academics, like John Gray, have been saying for years that what you get eventually in very, very multicultural societies is people won't vote on housing policy or transport, they just vote ethnically. In the end, they'll just vote. And that's what's happened down there. They've got about 30 seats, I think. So they had control of the Lib Dems or Labour, and then they didn't do what they were told, so they just got this new party. This will happen. I mean, I'm afraid. I just get very frustrated because some very, very important things don't filter through to the general public if they're not really looking for it.
Right.
Yet another one I talk a lot about now because it's very important is illegal migration and the cost of illegal migration through the years.
Yeah.
The best data that we have is that every single one of the migrants that just rock up on the south coast are fiscally negative to the tune of about £500,000 across the £500,000 per person.
Yeah.
So that I would say, Mike, that is massively important news. Hardly I don't think the BBC have ever reported that.
No. Well, even now, mostly. I mean, Kemi Baynock's got some front pages this week with her wish to change the system. But a lot of the times now, even the Daily Mail, you'll be going through, it's like page 22, left-hand page.
Yeah, you might spot it if you...
Above a 25-4, as we used to say, nobody's looking at that. The right-hand page is where it wants to be. Or maybe the front page.
Or maybe the front page,
But people, I think, also get a bit tired of it.
They do. I don't. I mean, in a way, you've got to. I think politically, I think there are more. You've got to have a solution. You've got to. Have
I mean, the news business itself as well is decreasing. I mean, if you look at what's going on with Sky, for example, you look at what's going on with NBC in America, Comcast, who own Sky in the final analysis.
I have no sympathy on that.
Well, no, you wouldn't, and neither do I. But it's a shrinking industry. MSNBC has been hived off now. And that was pathetically, badly biased against Trump. MSNBC, has been hived off. CNBC, the business channel, is a success because it goes to all the dealing rooms and it's a business channel. That's fine. But Sky has gone so woke. I mean, if you remember, they started doing a climate hour, something like between 6 and 7 at night, which literally had no viewers.
Yeah.
Nobody's watching it. No. And you go, what are you doing?
What do they want to be election?
And again, on climate, it's another issue which they're just telling lies about it.
Yeah.
And they're not asking anybody any questions. And they're just going, well, we all know that this is happening. So let's just assume that.
But it doesn't, the annoying thing about the climate issue is that they don't get to the second base, to use a sort of baseball thing. They don't get to the second base and explain that if you ship all your jobs off to China and get all your products made there, and dirty industries, a lot of them, coal pumping out, no labour standards or anything, you ship it and it arrives back at Tesco, you feel good, you've decarbonised, but it's so dishonest. Anyone
it's rubbish.
Can see
complete rubbish.
Actually, I think one of the things that the people that did control the media, the New York Times, WAPO, and to some extent the BBC here, are finding, and it will increase, do you agree that there was anger when Trump won because it was the first, people said I was the first podcast
in 2016.
No, this time when they, because the intelligent people we should look up to, like Rory Stewart, who predicting Congress. He was going to. I mean, he knows. He knows
what can you say about somebody like him?
Unbelievable.
I thought J.D. Vance absolutely nailed it when he said the trouble with people like Rory Stewart is he's got an IQ of 110, but he thinks it's 130.
I know.
And he thinks he's cleverer than. But this is also going back to Brexit. We were painted. People who didn't go along with the European Union. People were painted as idiots or bigots or worse or racists. You must not want to have a stake in the European Union because there's something wrong with you. Well, that's just not a political defensive. It was. I used to at parties. You can imagine that you go to some parties, middle class parties in particular. People, they'll all be Remainers, and they'll say how awful this is, and I'd be debating them. And sometimes I used to get tired of it and say, okay. I'm going to debate you if you can tell me roughly within 100 million what the target 2 obligations in the banking system between Germany and Italy are. If you can't tell me that now, I can't educate you at the same time. But you're quite right. The Brexit case, actually, particularly on the left, particularly on the sort of patriotic left,
is incredibly strong. And you've got people like Perry Anderson wrote something for the LRB that was, I think it was 40,000 words on how the EU was a completely corrupt, useless thing.
Which it is.
And he just completely, so actually it's like an onion really. The sort of, some people think it's not terribly sophisticated of you, but it's very thought out.
But it's very thought out. It's actually very factually based.
Very good.
And because most of the people who think they want to stay in the European Union don't really know why. Because I like Europe, usually they go.
No, it's vibes.
Yeah. I want my kids to go and work in Europe. Well, you still can, if you really want to.
Yeah.
They can actually do that.
No, they can, and most of the states that they want to go to, if they're the right person, they will take them anyway.
Yeah.
So there's no big deal.
Yeah.
We should probably talk about the pandemic a little bit in this, because we spent a long time trying to kick against some of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But again, I felt slightly frustrated because I argued for the Swedish thing, a sort of a looser, less draconian thing, and I predicted all along that it would have better outcomes, social and economic and everything, and so it proves.
Yes. Yeah. Although interesting, isn't it, now that Sweden has managed to get a better outcome from COVID, but they're now currently suffering a really awful outcome from all the immigration that they've done.
Oh yeah, no,
that's
a disaster.
Right?
Yes,
which is a complete nightmare.
Yeah,
even worse than ours.
No, I've got. If you speak to Swedes, they're very worried about their country.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some Swedes I've spoken to who are even worried that the country will literally break.
Yeah.
Split up physically.
Right.
And all sorts of things. So and it's like the classic sort of liberal morality tale, isn't it? You get these progressives, airhead people that think, oh yes, let's just invite lots of Somalians. And then you look at Somalians and Swedes in the same jurisdiction, you think, it's going to work. How
I mean, there's a reason why Somalia is a basket case of a country.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the people living there have either, one, allowed it to happen or have encouraged it to happen.
But cultural, culture migrates. It's not the data says that's true. I interviewed a guy called Garrett Jones, an academic from the States. I got him over here because he wrote such an incredible book on the Chinese diaspora. And he said, he studied the Chinese populations in Malaysia, Indonesia, obviously Singapore, and throughout Asia, and say, okay, what's the effect of Chinese populations moving in? And it increases your GDP, savings rate goes up, and because the Chinese do roughly the same thing everywhere they are.
Right.
They save and educate themselves.
Yes.
And highly productive.
But they're interestingly less involved than
politically,
than say, for example, South Indian or South Asian people are in politics. Because one of the things that I learned, because I got a very early education in the way that people from the Indian subcontinent operate, because I worked for this Asian magazine, which was first started out being owned by some Gujaratis from West Africa, and then ended up being owned by this slightly dodgy Pakistani shipping billionaire.
Right.
But the amount of involvement in local politics that was going on, even back then, and we're talking about sort of early 80s, people getting seats on the councils, places. We were based in Hounslow, Heston, out that way, Southall, They're very good at building a sort of a power base. So that by the time we've got to where we are now, if you go to Southall, I'd be amazed if you could find a white councillor. Yeah,
well, probably. But the point that the book makes is it's interesting, isn't it, Mike? There's some of the things that the bloke in the pub knows.
Yeah.
Also, that the middle sometimes doesn't know or pretends it doesn't know. But actually, the academic research proves.
Yes.
And all the claim was that if you want to know what Italians are. What do Italian Americans think? What are their set of values and so on? Just look at Italy, and they're remarkably similar.
Yeah, exactly.
Very, very. Let's finish on what's happening in the States, because that is very, very exciting. The Trump vaccine. I have less. I said before a few times. I mean, Trump's playing a blinder now, but in the past I have said, right horse, wrong rider. I like Vance more. Vance is more what we.
I think Vance is a real find.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he was a great choice.
Yeah.
I don't know who made that choice.
It gives heft to the thing.
He does.
And you've got to be
very smart.
Very smart. And he's lived it. But don't you think that it's encouraging? It's like the border thing. All I wanted was a Western state to say, we should get a border.
Yeah.
And anyone who is here illegally, we can remove. And that's what any normal state needs to do.
Yeah.
And we were looking for a state to prove you could do it. So it's encouraging, yeah?
It is, definitely, because he's doing exactly what he said. And I mean, I've been talking to Americans. Obviously, my sister lives there. She watches things like Bill Maher, who's very good, who's now becoming something of an icon, really, because he's not just one thing or the other. He's a mixture of everything. And Andrew Sullivan as well, you know, who's gone from, you know, his sort of journey from, you know, being gay to being outed to getting AIDS to becoming, you know, a Republican and blah, blah, blah. Interesting people who can see.
He writes very well, Andrew Sullivan.
Who can see that basically, you know, this is not just about Republican versus Democrat anymore. It's about kind of common sense, because they've actually adopted the phrase common sense versus no common sense. You know, so this week we get Trump pushing the executive order through that says women in sport must be protected against men trying to play those sports. Perfect sense.
Obviously, and yet we're talking about the media, and the first thing, well, not the first thing I saw, one of the things I saw this morning on my feed was a Sky sports reporter slamming him for that and saying, and I said, well, so how can you have fair and safe sport? Right. You can't, unless he's done, you know.
And how can you, with any version of common sense in your head or a straight face, make out that it's wrong? Yeah. Because it isn't wrong. And similarly, you know, with the immigration issue, people said he'll never be able to do that. It's always interesting to watch the opponents, you know. Oh, there's loads of things that he wants to do. Lots of these executive orders won't be possible to do. And one of them was flying people back to their home country. And there were so many people going, he won't be able to do that. Well, he's doing it. Simple. He's just going,
no, you can. I think it's a moment. I think what the interesting about it is, and no one knows, and I think that, you know, wokery and progressivism is deeply embedded in a lot of people's minds, and that's a problem. But I'm not, you know...
and there's a great possibility that Trump will kind of go too far in a couple of situations. And
might go to foreign trade or something. I mean, I support tariffs and protectionism.
I'm not against tariffs. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations this week with people who are on the right, who think tariffs are a bad idea. I say, well, they're a good idea if you're protecting your own workers and you're protecting your own industries.
It's very simple, Mike. If you Chinese EVs, Chinese electric vehicles are a third cheaper in the market in Europe and the States. Right. This country foolishly has no tariff at all. The European Union has 15-20%. Biden put on 100%. Could even go more. But the fact is, if the Americans got it right, if you want to keep a domestic car industry, you have to have tariffs. If you're eaten alive, you won't have any of it.
So well, I mean, the European car industry has more or less been wiped out.
They'll have to wake up to that. I'm in favour of those. But anyway, so I think in this country, so what happens is, politically, what we use the expression of, you have all this system, and then the tide rushes in, and there's a revolution, like Brexit or like Trump getting elected. And the tide rushes in and changes everything. Do you think we can have a restoration here? In this country, and when will it happen?
I think so, because I think inevitably the world moves. You know, Starmer has to be very careful. I mean, I was watching last night a guy called Stephen Doughty, who's an absolutely useless individual. I've had run-ins with him in the past. He's now apparently some kind of, you know, minister in the Foreign Office, and he was talking about the whole Gaza thing, and he was being asked, you know, do you condemn what Donald Trump has said about, you know, taking Gaza over and turning it into a casino, North Jersey Shore style? And he wouldn't say. No. He said, well, you know, I'm not going to comment about every single thing that that Donald Trump does, which tells you that the new Labour version after Trump is not going to be the same as the old one.
Well, he probably does,
because he would have said, I'm sure, if Trump hadn't become the president, you know, that's about outrageous things against all of our policies. We're never going to sit in line with that. He didn't say that. So they're going to have to go along with what Trump wants.
For pure power, I mean, I get that. And, you know, there's the Foreign Secretary who we said before, you know, has likened Trump to a neo-Nazi. Very foolish thing to say.
Very idiotic.
And therefore, obviously, the wrong appointment.
Yeah.
And,
and I don't think he'll last, frankly.
And Chagos,
through this whole thing. Chagos is a massive mistake. No. But the thing is that in the end, all of those things that Labour used to stand for will fall away, because we know Starmer has no ideological base.
No,
and he'll do whatever's expedient.
But it's like the trade policy. I say to people, I don't know what the Labour Party's trade policy is.
No.
Because they don't.
No.
They don't know what
They don't even know what their net zero policy is anymore. And they now want to build a runway at Heathrow. They want to reopen the Rosebank, as an oil field.
I want that.
Yeah, well, I do. I don't care so much about the third runway. But the point is that where are they on all this? You know, Ed Miliband's over there shouting and screaming with his ukulele about how, you know, we must stop all air traffic. Yeah.
What they do know,
and no more oil exploration, and they're doing all of it.
What they do know, Mike, is that they can give away a territory we've had for 200 years and pay to do so.
Yes.
I've said, I did a little speech at Oxford at the Durham Union, and I just slammed it. I was so indignant about it. I think it's an outrage. Anyway, listen, thank you. I think we will get a restoration eventually, because it's one of these things that if it has to happen, it will actually happen. And we hope to be part of it. And
it might be led, because let's not forget, part of the reason why we've had all these ridiculous things happening with DEI and the wokists is that it's all happened through companies. I mean, the big banks have done it, the big companies have done it. You know, they've all set up, what do you call it, networks for, transgender individuals and all that.
You can't bank with a decent bank.
No. Once they've all given that, I mean, I've got, just as a final aside, I took out an ISA, with some bank I'd never heard of. I keep getting emails from them about how many trees they're planting.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm not interested. I don't want a bloody tree planted. I just want a decent interest rate. You
want to return.
I want to make some money. And maybe I'll plant my own tree if that's what I want to do. But not yours.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think we will get, eventually, towards the end of this decade, there'll be quite a big, the sea will rush in, and I think it will change. I think people are fed up with it.
Hope so.
And I think Labour's toast. But it's been great chatting to you, and I wanted to get you along to partly thank you for being so kind to us.
Not at all.
And getting us on so much.
Well, you speak a lot of sense. I mean, it's not entirely just altruistic. I mean, you're on the same wavelength as what we do an awful lot of the time. And in fact, if push came to shove, and if I was ever going to join a political party, it might be yours.
Great.
But I probably never will.
A Mets fan as well, great. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Cheers, thanks.